Today's image of Benito Mussolini as the clownish thug and posturing autocrat who dragged the Italian people to near total disaster is largely post-World War II. In the 1920s and 30s, he enjoyed a very different reputation in America and elsewhere, an almost entirely positive fame. Washington, from the Republican 1920s well into the Roosevelt years, viewed Mussolini as a forceful leader who brought order to Italy's post-World War I chaos, stabilized their economy, and was a partner in the fight against international bolshevism. Early on, Roosevelt called Mussolini that admirable Italian gentleman. He didn't finally give up on Il Duce until Italy declared war on France in June 1940. The New York press treatment of Mussolini through the 1920s and 30s ranged from cautiously positive to positively infatuated. The New York Times foreign columnist, Anne O'Hare McCormick, who would go on to be the first female journalist to win a Pulitzer, wrote rapturously about Mussolini's economic and social transformations of Italy well into the 1930s. The Saturday Evening Post serialized Mussolini's autobiography in 1928. William Randolph Hearst's newspaper chain retained Il Duce to write his own articles. New York academia felt the attraction as well. Columbia University's Casa Italiana, housing Italian studies programs, opened in 1927 with funding from the city's Italian-American business leaders and with a largely pro-fascist faculty. It enjoyed warm relations with Il Duce, who, according to a 1926 Times article, offered to equip the entire house with Italian furniture of various periods, paintings, and art objects obtained from the old royal palaces of Italy, a polite way of saying pilfered. Decades later, Casa Italiana would serve as a stand-in for the Soviet Residentura in the TV series The Americans. In this context of general goodwill, it did not take long for the grassroots pro-fascist groups to organize and take to the city streets in black uniforms, imitating those worn by Mussolini's troops. The largest, the Fascist League of North America, the FLNA, claimed more than 12,000 members at its peak. These black shirts marched on Columbus Day, Garibaldi's birthday, which happened to be July 4th, and Memorial Day. They formed an honor guard in City Hall Park at a celebration for the Italian long-distance flyer Francesco de Pinedo, while a crowd of thousands cheered and gave the stiff-arm Roman salute, which the Nazis soon copied. No one in the city was more anti-fascist than Carlo Tresca, the publisher of a tiny left-wing newspaper, Il Martello. Tresca was a star of the radical left for decades before World War II. He was an easy focus for media attention, tall and handsome with old-world flair. He sported a pointy Van Dyke beard, pince-nez glasses, and the heavy accent of a cartoon Italian waiter. Tresca was born in Abruzzi in 1879 into a prosperous family that lost everything as he was growing up. He sailed steerage for New York City in 1904, where he joined forces with the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, or Wobblies, the most radical union movement of the era. He embraced their code of direct action, which meant fighting the businessmen's strikebreakers fist for fist and club for club. When New York hotel workers went on strike in 1913, Tresca stood up at a meeting and railed, "Fellow workers, a strike, that is not a course of lectures, but a fight. I say we stop talking. I say we act." He then led them on a rock and bottle throwing attack of the finer hotels around Times Square. When he was arrested, strikers attacked the police station to try to free him. He was arrested many more times, once for shouting "Viva Socialismo" in a cop's face, and beaten, shot at, slashed with a knife, and threatened by a lynch mob. When a bomb exploded outside J.P. Morgan's offices on Wall Street in 1920, the newspapers immediately identified Tresca as a suspect, though the authorities never did. While much of America was praising Mussolini and his fascists in the 1920s, Tresca viciously denounced them in Il Martello, calling them an army of degenerate, perverted criminals and the most savage, bloodthirsty gangsters who fight the poor at the order of the rich. He was as harshly critical of New York's wealthy, pro-fascist Italians, the prominenti. At the top of Tresca's list was the owner of the big pro-Mussolini newspaper Il Progresso, a man named Generoso Pope. Pope was in many ways a classic immigrant success story. Raised in a small village near Naples, he arrived in New York in 1906 as a teenager, speaking no English, carrying $10. By 1930, he was said to be the wealthiest Italian in the city. Very effective in getting out the Italian vote, he was a welcome guest in Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia's office and at Franklin Roosevelt's White House. Mussolini showered him with medals, honors, and privileges, feeding not only Pope's ego, but his standing in the community. All of this made him a fat, juicy target for Tresca, who skewered him as an illiterate quadruped, a golden ass, and king of the cafoni, which means oafs or boors. In return, Tresca was a target of violent retaliation. Armed thugs smashed the Il Martello printing presses. One night, when Tresca was to address a rally in Italian Harlem, a bomb went off in a car that had been circling the block outside the hall. The three men in the car were all killed. Evidently, the bomb was meant for Tresca, but detonated prematurely. Tresca continued his anti-fascist campaigning into the war years. A wartime intelligence file would sum him up well in a single line. A great individualist, he held tenaciously to his hatreds. It was the death of him. At 9:30 on the night of Monday, January 11th, 1943, Tresca and an associate stepped out of the Dowdy building at West 15th Street and Fifth Avenue, where the Il Martello and IWW offices were. At 63, Tresca was, if stouter and grayer, still an impressive figure, wearing a long black cape and a wide-brimmed hat. He and his friend crossed arm in arm to the north side of 15th Street. The lights were dimmed for wartime, and there was little traffic. A short man in dark clothes stepped out of the shadows and fired two bullets into Tresca, one in the back and the other in the face. As Tresca toppled backward to the street, his killer ran to a nearby car, which sped off. Ouija, the city's most celebrated crime photographer, arrived in minutes to snap grisly photos of the anarchist lying on his back, his feet toward the curb, a pool of blood around his head. It had all the earmarks of a gangland execution. But who killed Tresca? He had made no end of enemies on both the left and the right. Just as he had railed against Mussolini and the fascists, he had bitterly denounced Stalin. Popular conspiracy theories had either Mussolini or Stalin reaching out to mafia boss Vito Genovese to silence the troublesome old man. Or he may have been murdered simply for causing a local mafioso to lose face. Frank Garofalo was a suave and handsome man, called the Cary Grant of mobsters. He and Tresca were bitter enemies. In September 1942, Tresca was at an Italian-American war bond banquet when Garofalo arrived. Complaining loudly about the presence of a gangster in the room, Tresca stormed out. Embarrassed, Garofalo vowed revenge. 4 months later, Tresca lay dead on the street. Had Garofalo put a hit on him? We may never know. In the middle of World War II, New York law enforcement had other worries than pursuing the murder of an argumentative anarchist. The case of Tresca's murder is unsolved to this day.